Hey, fifth graders, it's Mrs. Seals back for our next science lab and our first science lab from the brand new school, which is super exciting. So last week we were talking about fossils. Today we're going to be talking about something called sedimentary rocks. So we're going to learn what a sedimentary rock is, and we're going to learn how sedimentary rocks are formed. The different steps that occur. So let's get started. Your target says, I can explore the processes that led to the formation of sedimentary rocks. And here I have two pictures of different kinds of sedimentary rocks. And after we discuss these steps or these processes, you will understand why these are sedimentary rocks and how to identify sedimentary rocks. So, a sedimentary rock is a rock that is formed when sediments, which are small pieces of rock that have broken off of other rocks, are compacted and cemented together. So if you look at that word sedimentary, you see the word sediment. So that's an easy way for you to remember that sedimentary rocks are made up of sediments. So in third and fourth grade, you learned about a word called weathering, which is how rocks are broken down into smaller pieces. And this can happen through wind, water, ice. Plant roots can break rocks. And when that happens, the small pieces that break off of rocks, we call those sediments. So through some processes that we're going to discuss, those sediments get compacted or squeezed together and cemented or glued together, and that's what creates a sedimentary rock. So here are some different pictures of some different types of sedimentary rocks. And what I want you to notice is that they all look different from each other. So not all sedimentary rocks look the same, but the important thing to notice is that when you look at each one of these, you can see that it is made up of sediments from different rocks. Like for example, when I look at this one, which I believe is sandstone, but I'm not 100% sure. Do you see how it almost looks like there are different, it has stripes because you can see these different layers of different colors of sediment. Each of those different colors of sediment came from different rocks. And as they piled up on top of each other over many, many years and were squeezed and cemented together, that's how the rock was formed. These are also sedimentary rocks, but they were formed in a little bit different ways. These would be called conglomerate rocks. And then again, here you see kind of those layers or stripes. So whenever you see a rock that has kind of these layers or stripes in it, or you notice kind of different colors or clumps of sediment that have been kind of compacted together, that's your clue that you're looking at a sedimentary rock. So, what processes lead to the formation of sedimentary rocks? So, the formation of sedimentary rocks is a three-step process. The first one is called sedimentation. And notice how I have the beginning of that word sediment in red to help you remember. That's going to help you remember what's happening during that step. After sedimentation, we have compaction. Again, I have the word compact in red to help you remember. And then the last step of sedimentary rock formation is called cementation. And again, I have the word cement in red. Okay, these words are big, and these are not words that we use or hear that often. So I know it can be kind of tricky to remember the meaning of these words, but if you can break the word apart and remember kind of the root word that I have here in red, it's going to help you remember what's happening during that step. So let's talk about sedimentation. Sedimentation is when the sediments are created, moved, and deposited. And this happens through weathering, erosion, and deposition. Hopefully those three words sound familiar to you. You learned about weathering in 3rd grade, and then in 4th grade, you learned about weathering, erosion, and deposition. Weathering is when rocks are broken apart by wind, water, or ice, or plant roots. Erosion is when those broken pieces of rock, again, that we call sediment, are moved or carried somewhere else, maybe by a river, maybe by the wind, maybe by a glacier. And then deposition is when those sediments are deposited in a new location. And these things can create landforms, but these three things are the first step in the formation of sedimentary rocks. And so the sedimentation, there's the word sediment. This is when the sediment is created by the rocks being broken, the sediment is moved, and the sediment is deposited. Okay, and I have a little saying here to help you remember the meaning of weathering, erosion, and deposition. I taught you this last year in 4th grade if you were here, and it goes like this: weathering breaks it, erosion takes it, deposition makes it. So in other words, weathering is when the rock is broken apart into smaller pieces called sediment. Erosion is when the sediment is moved or carried somewhere else. And deposition is when the sediment is dropped off or deposited somewhere else. Okay, so if you can remember that saying, weathering breaks it, erosion takes it, deposition makes it, that will help you remember what is happening during this step of sedimentary rock formation. Okay, so step 1 is sedimentation, when the sediments are created, moved, and deposited by weathering, erosion, and deposition. Step 2 is called compaction. So there I have the word compact. When something is compact, that means it's squeezed, it's made tighter, it's made smaller. Okay, so compaction is the process by which overlying pressure from rocks and soil reduces the size or volume of sediments. So what happens is, when I have sediment being deposited in the same spot over and over again for many, many years, because remember, this is a slow change. Sedimentary rock formation is not something that happens overnight or even over a couple of years. These processes take thousands or maybe even millions of years, depending on what type of sedimentary rock is being formed. So over thousands or millions of years, you have layers of sediment building up and piling up on top of each other, and that squeezes them together or compacts them. It's all that weight and pressure is pushing down and compacting the sediments together. So here I have kind of a little picture of what that looks like. Here are some sediments. They haven't been compacted yet, but in this picture, you can tell that all the pressure from these layers on top is pushing down and compacting these sediments. It's making them smaller and changing the amount of space they take up. They're not taking up as much space because they're smaller. Okay, so step 1, we have sedimentation, when the sediment is created, moved, and deposited through weathering, erosion, and deposition. Step 2 is compaction, when the sediment pieces are, the layers of sediment are pushing down on each other and making the sediment pieces smaller. And then the third step, the last step, is called cementation. And there I have the word cement. So think about cement that is used to, make roads and sidewalks and things like that. It's basically just crushed up rocks mixed with some water and some mineral glue. So that's basically what's happening here, but naturally. Cementation is the process of binding and hardening of sediments into hard rock. So in this picture before in compaction, do you notice how here's all the sediment pieces, but in between them is kind of empty space, right? So this isn't one solid rock yet. These are still little tiny pieces of sediment with space in between them. But now what happens is over many, many years, as it rains or moisture gets in between the sediment, some of the minerals start to act like glue, and the little pieces of sediment bind or glue themselves together. So now I don't have empty space between each piece of sediment. Now I have basically cement. Some of the minerals got wet, they started acting like glue, and now those pieces of sediment are kind of like glued together into one rock. And there's our sedimentary rock. So again, whoops, let's review. So step one is sedimentation. There's our word sediment to remind us that's when our sediment is created, moved, and deposited through weathering, erosion, and deposition. Step two is compaction. There's the word compact to remind me this is when I have layers of sediment piling up on each other. All that weight and pressure is pushing down and making the pieces smaller and closer together. And then step three is cementation. There's the word cement to remind me that this is when the pieces of sediment are cemented together. When after it rains or they get wet and they start to act like glue, and all the pieces are held together into a sedimentary rock. So a couple things I want to tell you about sedimentary rocks. Again, I mentioned this, but I want to remind you, this is a process that takes a very long time. This can take thousands or even millions of years, depending on the type of rock. This is not a change you're going to see overnight. This is not a change you're going to see over a year or just a couple years or even your lifetime. This is a very slow change because think about it. You have to have, first of all, you have to have rocks that get broken down by wind, water, ice, or plant roots. That takes a while. Then those pieces have to be moved and deposited by wind, water, or ice. That takes a while. Then you have to have sediment piling up on top of each other. So you have to have layers upon layers upon layers piling up in each other and pushing down and creating that pressure to compact those pieces. That takes a long time. And then you have to have the cementation, which is when some of those mineral pieces bind together after many years of rain and moisture getting in there. Okay, so it's a long process, a slow process. Sedimentary rocks can look very different from each other. Sedimentary rocks do not all look the same. I showed you some different pictures of sedimentary rocks. There's several different kinds. There's sandstone, there's limestone, there is one called shale, there's one called a conglomerate. I'm trying to think if there's some more I can't remember the names of. But the important thing to remember is that if you see a rock that has, let me go back, those different layers that kind of looks like stripes, or you can see different colors kind of that have been cemented together, like these clearly came from different rocks, right? This part looks nothing like this kind of reddish orange part. So those are sediments that have been compacted together and cemented that all came from different rocks to make one new sedimentary rock. All right, and then the last thing is that fossils are usually found within sedimentary rocks, because if you go back and think about what you learned about fossils last week, it makes sense, right? You have layers of sediment, maybe an animal, leaves a trace or a track in the sediment. It gets covered up by more layers of sediment and compacted and cemented, and that trace is going to be preserved. So that's why most fossils are found within sedimentary rocks. So the kids that are here in class are going to be making a model of a sedimentary rock using some different different colored chocolate chips. This is just for fun. This is just to kind of help you remember the different steps that are, involved. They'll also be working with a table group to create a poster showing the different steps of this process. And don't forget, after the video, there is a quiz for you on sedimentary rock formation to see what you learned and what you know and what you remember. So if this is something you want to do at home and you have these materials, you can. It does involve a hot iron. So, make sure you have parents' permission and that you're staying safe with that. So on this, hopefully you can see that, on this piece of foil, I have 3 different colors of chocolate chips. I have regular kind of dark brown chocolate chips. I have these lighter brown ones. These are butterscotch chocolate or butterscotch chips. And then I have white chocolate chips. So the reason that these are different colors is so that we can see the different pieces of sediment that have come from different rocks. These are going to represent my rocks. Okay, we're going to pretend like these are all rocks. So remember, the first step in the sedimentary rock formation is sedimentation. And this is when the sediments are created, moved, and deposited through weathering, erosion, and deposition. The rocks are broken down into smaller pieces that we call sediment. Those pieces of sediment are moved somewhere else, maybe from wind, water, or ice, and those pieces of sediment are deposited, okay? Remember the saying I told you, weathering breaks it, erosion takes it, deposition makes it. So to show sedimentation, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break these rocks, remember these are representing my rocks, into smaller pieces and kind of put them here in the middle of my foil. So here's my sedimentation. My rocks are being broken up into smaller pieces. Again, remember, this isn't a fast change. This isn't going to happen overnight or over just a year or two. It's going to be over thousands of years or millions of years. Maybe the wind is breaking up my rocks. Maybe water is breaking up rocks. Maybe ice is breaking up rocks. And they're being moved or eroded and deposited. So this is sedimentation. Oh, these are kind of hard to break up. All right, that's good enough. So there's my sedimentation. The next step in the process, hopefully you remember, is compaction. And that's when the layers are pushing down on one another, getting smaller and more tightly packed. So to show compaction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold up my little chocolate chip rock nice and tight so that all my pieces are pressed tightly together, and then I'm going to push down on it. So there's my compaction. And then the last step of this process, remember, is cementation, when those pieces of sediment are cemented together and held together tightly, and that's what creates the rock. So to show this, this is where I'm going to use my iron, my hot iron, and I'm going to push down on my sedimentary rock. Now, the important thing I want you to know, remember, this is just a model. This is just a demonstration. It's important for you to know that sedimentary rock formation does not involve heat. It does not involve heat or melting, okay? I am just doing this to represent how these pieces are going to be kind of stuck together, okay? So I'm going to take my iron. I'm going to push down, kind of hopefully cementing these pieces of chocolate all together. All right, so then what I'm going to do turn off my iron. It's really hot. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to let it cool for a second. And then I'm going to open this up and hopefully we will have a very lovely sedimentary rock. Ooh, I like it. This kind of looks like the conglomerate rocks that I showed you. So you can tell that this sedimentary rock is made up of different pieces of sediment from different rocks that through this process that we've been talking about have come together to create one rock. So I have like my white chocolate chip pieces, my butterscotch, and my regular chocolate. And through sedimentation, compaction, and cementation have come together to form one sedimentary rock. Pretty cool, right? All right, so I hope that you had fun learning about that process and seeing the chocolate chip rock be created. And I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye. Have a good day.